RX Television on RxMuscle.com. This is Iron Debate, the post-Arnold Classic episode of Iron Debate, brought to you by Redcon One. Redcon One, presenting sponsor of RX Muscle's coverage of the 2019 Arnold Classic. I'm your host, Sadiq Faruqi. This is going to be a breakdown of two of the bigger topics from this past weekend in Columbus, Ohio. Brandon Curry, the champion of the 2019 Arnold Classic. Let's meet our panelists first from the Aceto University, also known as Aceto A&M, the man they call the technician, Chris Aceto. Chris, have you recovered from the busy weekend?
Yeah, I've recovered, and my university, unlike Trump's, is still in business, so.
Early shots fired as we now go north of the border to the University of Abiad. Fouad Abiad joining us for the first time in a very long time. Fouad, great to have you back.
How's it going, guys? Thanks for having me on.
And then we go, of course, to our Cape Coral studios and join the man with the final word on all topics, Dave Palumbo, who just watched the Game of Thrones trailer. Now, our producer Tyler says it was a mix of emotions between tears, between breaking studio furniture. Which one is more accurate?
You can't get the true flavor of it on your cell phone. I got to do it on my 65 or 70-inch TV. I think it'll be way more impactful than. But it's coming. Winter is coming.
Of course, it's easy to say when you're sitting in 75-degree weather.
Right. That's a Game of Thrones reference. It's not a.
A weather reference. I know. Of course, the man who was wearing shorts in Columbus in 25-degree weather.
I did. I refused to accept the fact that I was going to a colder climate, and I just stuck with I stayed with my same outfit I always wear.
Keeping it real. Let's get to our first topic. Of course, Brandon Curry winning the 2019 Arnold Classic. Going into the show, many thought it was going to come down to between him and William Bonac. Bonac, of course, the defending champion from 2018. Of course, Bonac, considered by many really outside of Shawn Rhoden, outside of Steve, quite possibly the best bodybuilder in the world. So, Chris Aceto, I'm going to go to you first on this one. Let's do a deep dive first on Brandon Curry. What did you see in him that allowed him to shake Arnold's hand at the end of the night?
Improvements. I mean, I thought from 2017 Olympia to 2018 Olympia was the same exact replica. It was the same Brandon as we've seen, which is good condition, not great condition. Still a little weak in the legs, tremendous shape and flow, but in certain areas need more back thickness. And I thought here, his shape was even better because he was actually fuller in the upper body. He definitely improved his legs, and his condition was very good. I don't think it was on the level of William Bonac's, but it was definitely strong enough to highlight the strengths that he has, which is shape, flow. He really opens up on the front double bicep, really opens up huge on the front lat spread. And his back thickness was there, which he's been a little bit lacking. He's more known for like a back lat spread than a back double. And this is probably the first time ever he's had strong glutes and hams. Even at the last two Olympias, I mean, he's had glutes and hams, but here they were, strong conditioning.
Fouad, let's go to you. What did you see out of Brandon Curry?
Improvements, of course, just like Chris said. I mean, his legs definitely look better from the front. I didn't think his glutes are more peeled, but I didn't see any dramatic change in the hamstring from the back. But I think the biggest difference between him and Bonac, and the reason he got the nod, was his overall shape. I think having that tiny waist with the flaring lats is kind of the trend that they're looking for now. And even though Bonac doesn't have a distended belly, he definitely has a blockier shape in the center because of his height. So I think that was the main, when I look at all the photos and everything, the glaring difference is just that tiny little waist that Brandon has, especially now bringing up the legs and make it kind of accentuate it even more.
Dave, let me go to you because Fouad brings up a good point, and that is the waist. In your opinion, do you think Brandon wowed the judging panel more so than Bonac, maybe underwhelming a little bit, maybe the expectation level being a little too high for William Bonac?
I'm going to make a very bold statement here. You know how when you first start training, you don't know what you really are and you have a lot of immature muscle? Well, that up until 2 years ago, that's the way Brandon looked. Brandon was a genetic freak who probably, trained, but he didn't train with someone hanging over his head, screaming in his ear like Dorian had and Ronnie had, when they were training. And I think he just kind of coasted by. When he hooked up with the Oxygen Gym out there and his coach, Abdullah, who is completely always wanted to work with Brandon. He told, Beta Badai, get me Brandon Curry. That's all he wanted to work with. He knew he could help him. And when Brandon went out to the Oxygen and started training like a maniac, heavy weights, being pushed to the hilt, he started to grow. So Brandon really hasn't hit his real true growth spurt till like 2 years ago. So now we're starting to see the fruits of his labor. Because as you know, you can't in 6 months make serious improvements. But over the last 2 years, he's made quality improvements and size improvements and thickness and Chris and I, like we mentioned, density seemed to be the word of the weekend. He looks like a different bodybuilder now. He looks like a true top 6 Olympian, maybe top 3 Olympian at this point. And I think we're going to see him only get better from here because now he's finally coming into his own. Even though he's, in his 30s already, he just took a long time to really, get to that point where he was decided, hey, this is what I want to do. I'm going to dedicate myself 100% to it. And even to prove that, he went all the way halfway across the world to train at Oxygen Gym, leaving his family behind. And that's why I think his story was the feel-good story of the weekend because of all the sacrifice he had to endure. But you know what? That's just Brandon. He needed to sequester himself. He needed to be pushed. And those last 2 years of doing it have definitely paid off because we're seeing the fruits of that labor now because he never could have stood next to the quality of muscle that Bonac had a year ago. And now he can. And I think moving forward, he's going to be very dangerous.
No, it's a good point. Obviously, we saw Brandon's whole family there, that group picture they showed him, and that was really one of the feel-good stories. He gave all the credit in the world to his wife, Brandy, and all the support, saying that she actually encouraged him first to go to Kuwait to do what he needs to do. And obviously, that was all validated this past weekend. Chris, I want to go back to you. Talk about direction. That seems to be one of the operative phrases right now. Direction, right? What kind of a look is the judging panel looking for? Are they looking for that more streamlined approach that Curry brought to the stage this past weekend? Or are they looking for that more dominant look that William Bonac brings? Obviously, this weekend, they went for the Curry look. Talk to us about the direction this weekend and maybe what you see over the course of the next 6 months.
Is that question for me?
Yes, Chris.
I just think that Shawn Rhoden won the Olympia and Brandon won this show. I think just because 2 guys, who have good structures won shows doesn't mean that they're going for less muscle and less conditioning. Shawn's conditioning was lights out at the Olympia, and Brandon's was as good as anyone in the show with the exception of Bonac. Bonac, I think you're conflating issues and looking too deep into the picture. If you just go to the show, the front double, Bonac looks bunched up next to Brandon. The front last spread, he looks narrow as hell compared to Brandon. Does he have more muscle? Yes. Does he have more density? Yes. Who wins those 2 poses? Brandon. You turn to the side, I would give Bonac that. No matter, you can't argue it any which way. There's no way you can argue he doesn't win that shot. You go to the side tricep, that's like an apples and oranges. I just don't buy into this idea of the direction, just because a guy's gut's not hanging down to their ankles and has more muscle, that's not what they're going for. It's not about Luke Sandow, but he was 3rd place. He's got a front double as good as both of those guys, meaning V-taper and smaller waist. He's a, quote, mass monster, so to speak. So, if Cedric at his best, he'd win this show. And then we'd be saying, oh, yeah, they're going for the symmetry. No, they're just going for the guy. My opinion is they're going for the guy, the best one there. And by definition, Rafael Brandao should have been 1 spot or maybe 2 higher. And he had, arguably the best condition in the show. Maybe not the best condition, but cleanest separation with, most impressive V-taper standing, most impressive V-taper front last spread, probably most impressive V-taper standing in the front double. So by that definition, if they were just pushing only shape and flow, then Rafael would place higher. I think they're judging. I'm sitting there, I'm judging both the Olympia and here, what's in front of me. Granted, I had, after prejudging Bonac in first place. But it's not like a confident, knockdown, and if you evaluate it, structure does count when competing against someone next to like Bonac. I mean, it's not like his structure's bad, but I mean, close your eyes and think what his frontal bicep looks like and to stand and relax versus Brandon's. And then, I mean, there's half the show right there.
Fouad, let's go back to you. From what you saw of William Bonac, what did he not have? What did he not deliver on Saturday night to get that title, that repeat title?
The flow. I actually kind of disagree with Chris. I think it's not just these two shows. And I actually think even if it was just these two shows, in years past, Phil would have beat Shawn just because he overpowered him with size. And I think at this show, Bonac would have beat Brandon. Because I'm looking at photos right now. I mean, they're most muscular. Brandon looks great, but Bonac kills him. But when you look at the overall structure of the physique, Brandon's got much prettier lines. And I think that's what the IFBB is looking for now. I mean, you look at the history last year of some of the shows. You have Nathan Diasha winning 2 or 3 shows. You have Michael Lockett winning 2 or 3 shows. There's definitely a trend towards. Now, I'm not saying these guys weren't the best guys in the show. I'm not saying their conditioning wasn't great. I'm not saying they don't have a lot of muscle. But it just also happens to be that these guys all have a streamlined look and a more 80s style or 90s style physique with a smaller waist and not this really thick obliques or really distended belly. I definitely think it's something they're looking for, and I do think it matters in judging.
Dave, I want to go to you to sort of settle the score on this one. As far as that operative word, direction, what you saw this past weekend, do you buy into that at all? And again, to answer the question, in your opinion, William Bonac coming second place, many thought that he was going to be the repeat champion. What did you not see out of William Bonac this past Saturday night?
I can't criticize either one of them because I think they were both at their best. And so when both competitors are at their best, then you have to say, all right, what are we looking for? And I tend to agree a little bit with Fouad in the sense that, Shawn Rhoden's Mr. Olympia now. That seems to be the standard. When Dorian was Mr. Olympia, they went for the big mass monsters were winning all the shows. And even when Ronnie was Mr. Olympia, the guys they were going for bigger guys. Now you have Mr. Olympia being Shawn Rhoden. I think they're looking for guys that are going to match up well with Rhoden's physique, since that seems to be the new standard. Having said that, if Bonac was at his best and Curry wasn't, Bonac would have won the show. I mean, it was a coin flip, like I said. But I think they might have gone with structure. Just to reestablish maybe a new criteria. But once again, I don't even know what the score. I didn't look at the scorecards. It could have been even if it was unanimous, the decision. It could have been like very close in all the judges' minds as to who they were going to pick, and they went with Curry at this show, and Curry's the champ. That doesn't mean that Bonac at the Olympia won't beat him, because technically, usually the Olympia, you get the bigger guys winning shows at the Olympia. Whereas the more streamlined guys like Cedric seem to do great at the Arnold, and then they don't do that well at the Olympia. So, but it always comes back to what do the judges got standing in front of them, and that's what they got to judge. This was a tough decision to make because these guys were evenly matched. But at the end of the day, I think improvement might have gotten it for Curry. They see huge improvement in this guy from the last show he did. All right, let's reward that.
Let's wrap this topic up with the operative question. How can Curry now do in the Olympia against Shawn Rhoden? Now, Chris, I want to go to you first on this one because seemingly we haven't had this show, Iron Debate, since the Olympia, but so much of the conversation has been about Shawn Rhoden. Well, who can challenge him, obviously, in the upcoming Olympia? Is he going to repeat in his quest to become a repeat champion? And so much of the narrative has been, well, it's because this guy was off or this guy's not going to be there. And then you look at 2019, and so much of the conversation is already about who's not going to be there. That Phil Heath likely will not be there. That Flex Lewis is probably a year away from taking the Open. That Big Ramy has to requalify, and what kind of shape is he going to come in? First of all, Chris, I want to divorce yourself as his coach. Is this a symptom of, all right, well, Shawn is a champion, but we might not be that convinced? Or is this something that does come about when you do have a new champion after a dynastic run, like the one we saw with Phil Heath?
No, I mean, just sum that up. I mean, Shawn's probably favored to be in the top 4 because, I mean, that's just how critics are. Meaning, Shawn Rhoden is the only bodybuilder in the last 6 years who's placed essentially in the top 3 every year, and then moronic people and well-versed people in this sport of bodybuilding say, well, it should be in the top 6 this year. So, I mean, he's never been respected as a threat to a top 2 Olympia finish, even when he was second, or even when he's been leading everyone else, with the exception of Phil after prejudging. That said, I think that if Shawn beats Shawn of last year, he'll win. That is, I mean, in my mind, a fact. But if he's not at his best, I always think all these shows are wide open. Can Brandon challenge him? Yes. Can Ramy challenge him? Yes. Can Rolly challenge him? Bonac challenge him? I don't think there's a lock on the show. I mean, you got to be at your best. And, if you're not, especially with Shawn, without a doubt with Shawn, if the judges see him and say, oh, he was better last year, there's no way he will win, period.
But Chris, I want to go back. I'm sorry. I want to rephrase maybe the question that I'm trying to get, and I want to get an answer from you. Again, divorcing yourself as his coach, because ever since Shawn Rhoden lifted that standout trophy, so much of the conversation was not about, well, Shawn deservedly won. It was about, well, had Phil not had this, had he not had the distension, that they couldn't reward him again the second year in a row with that distension. And then the conversation quickly went to next year as far as who could possibly knock. Do you see that maybe, again, there's an operative lack of respect for the champ, but also just maybe people need to see him win it again for him to have that mystique as, all right, this is his title?
I mean, you beat Phil. If that's not enough, I don't know what is. I don't think Shawn Rhoden is the person who feels like he has to prove himself, regardless of what people say. But I mean, I don't even know how to answer the question, because it's so speculative. Starting with, well, what if Phil? It sounds like, well, what if Phil was at 2011 shape or 2012? Well, he's not. People's physiques change. What if this guy shows up at his best? Well, let's see him show up at his best. I mean, it's all just ultimate of speculation. What I know for a fact is Shawn won in his best condition and his biggest size ever. And if he brings that again next year, it's good enough to win. And if he improves on that, there is no way he will lose if he improves on that.
So let's talk about, again, Brandon Curry coming off that Arnold Classic. And you think back, Chris, to 2 years ago when Cedric McMillan won the Arnold Classic, and the conversation was, can that Cedric McMillan physique challenge Phil Heath and those power poses, the 3D features that he brings to the stage? Well, now we forward now to 2019. Brandon Curry coming off that win. And we talk about direction. We talk about what the judges want to see, what they liked out of Brandon Curry. What you saw out of Brandon Curry this past Saturday night, forget about the last two Olympias, how do you stack him up against Shawn Rhoden from what we saw 6 months ago?
I think he compares fairly well. I mean, you got to see them next to each other. I think he compares well. He opens up like Shawn does on the front double. He opens up on a lot of shots, and his body changes, and he looks impressive, round and pleasing and defined in all the shots. I think what changes, of course, is other people you're standing next to in that lineup. For example, I think that Rolly at his all-time best standing next to Brandon looks too small. And we've already seen Rolly at his all-time best standing next to Shawn at his all-time best. Shawn doesn't look small. So it's who you're standing next to at that Olympia lineup that changes the dynamic, where your eyes go and who your perception is of, being the best in that lineup.
Fouad, let's go to you. From what you saw out of Brandon Curry this past weekend, what would you rate as his prospects to challenge for that Olympia title last year, coming in 5th, and what you saw out of him and how he stacks up against Shawn Rhoden and that look that Rhoden brings to the stage?
I think a couple things. One, I think Shawn's not getting the respect he deserves.
Agreed.
Possibly because he beat Phil when Phil was not at his best. Ramy was not at his best. Mac was at his best. I think that was a fair. I think that's the problem. I think there's these little asterisks next to his victory that are keeping people from really believing in him. But I think when it comes to Brandon, they kind of have opposite strong points. You have Brandon has an amazing upper body, great arms, great chest, thicker back now. and he's got the same small waist that Shawn has, but then Shawn has crazy legs, crazy hamstrings, crazy glutes. So I think between the two of them, it's going to come down to who has more detail and who has a better overall flow. If it comes down to that, I think Shawn can win. And this is all obviously assuming they're all at their best. But I think Shawn can beat Brandon on overall detail and overall flow. He definitely has the prettier physique, and they just trade strong points.
So again, to recap, in your opinion, do you feel that Shawn Rhoden needs to win again, needs to repeat for the, the quote doubters to remove some of those asterisks from their description of Mr. Olympia, Shawn Rhoden?
As a fan of the sport, I think if Shawn wants to eliminate that asterisk here and there of all these things, he's got to beat the bigger guys at their best. He's got to beat like a Rami at his best. He's got to beat a Phil at his best. He's got to beat these guys at his best. Look, I've won shows and I've beaten guys I shouldn't have beaten, but I know that. Like I beat, 5 years ago I beat Dennis Wolf, but it was like Dennis Wolf at like 70%. So like that doesn't count as me beating Dennis Wolf. So I'm not saying it's that dramatic with Shawn Rhoden, but at the same time, if you want people to quiet people down, you have to put a stamp on it by beating some of these guys that are really known as the top contenders.
Dave, final word again. Topic one is Shawn Rhoden getting the deserved respect as Mr. Olympia, and then transition into Brandon Curry. Your prospects for Brandon Curry 6 months from now taking the Olympia stage against Shawn Rhoden.
I think the Brandon Curry we saw at the Arnold Classic this weekend definitely could be a top 3 Mr. Olympia contender. I mean, the only person we don't know if he can beat would be Big Ramy, and we haven't seen Big Ramy in shape. So assuming Big Ramy comes in shape, I'm assuming he's a top 3 guy, pretty easily. So we're talking, we know Brandon can beat Bonac now at his best. We don't know if he can beat Rulli at his best because we didn't see Rulli at his best this past weekend. I'm assuming Brandon's been on an upsurge. I think that we can see a better Brandon Curry at the Olympia. Because he matches up so well against Shawn Rhoden, and Rhoden has better, I think, more gifts at his disposal, wider, bigger structure, better legs. I don't think he can beat Rhoden at his best. Now, that's to say, once again, will Rhoden be at his best? I don't know. The Rhoden I saw this past weekend, he looked a little small. I don't know if he's been training as hard. Chris and I discussed this on Heavy Muscle Radio. Shawn's been taking a pretty big break from the gym. Hopefully once he gets back on his, on the schedule, he'll make the improvements he needs and get back to where he left off. But there's no guarantee with that. The great thing about Brandon is that he's dangerous. If everyone else is a little off and he keeps getting better and better, he's a guy who could win Mr. Olympia down the road. We're talking about guys that are shape guys now, the Rhodens and the Currys, even the Bonac to a certain degree. But, you got that X factor, that unknown factor of like the Rammies and, of course, the Rulli Winklers when they're in shape. These guys have tremendous amounts of muscle mass on their body. In terrific contest shape, they're very dangerous because let's face it, bodybuilding is about building muscle. And we like to see the mass monsters up there. So if you get 2 guys that are freaky, crazy, insanely conditioned with a lot of muscle mass, I think everyone's in trouble. We haven't seen that. We have not gotten that on stage. I mean, the closest we got was last year with Rulli Winkler, finishing 3rd. A lot of people thought, he might have been a little bit, he should have beat Phil Heath. So he's going to be the guy that's going to be dangerous. Ramy's going to be the guy that's going to be dangerous to Rhoden. I think Rhoden right now can take out all the shape guys because he's the king of the shape guys. Once again, until we get to the Olympia, we won't know for sure, however. And that's where it amounts to. But right now, Shawn Rhoden is Mr. Olympia. And, when you're sitting in that Mr. Olympia seat, okay, there's a lot of confidence that comes with that. There's a lot of, also, you get a lot of give-me's from the judges. So Rhoden would have to really screw up to lose the title, come September. It would be on him. He can lose it. He's not going to lose the title if he comes in as good as he was. He's going to lose it because he doesn't come in as good as he was. And we know that with Chris Aceto in his corner, conditioning is not going to be an issue. It's going to be a matter of whether Shawn Rhoden's head is in the championship mode the rest of this year.
Well, certainly one of the questions last Olympia was whether or not Shawn Rhoden would take that stage and tell the world, this is my show, this is my title. He did just that. That's going to do it for this episode of Iron Debate. Special thanks to Chris, the technician Aceto, Fouad Abiad, Dave Palumbo, and of course, our producer Tyler Shore. Sadiq Faruqi, we'll see you next time.